when you see the images of Mujibur Rahman being brought down, not just his house ransacked. We have seen in multiple locations, if we can play those pictures, please, in multiple locations, the statues being brought down. And we saw a horrible image today of a protester urinating on his statue, right? We have seen a protester walk out with, that's the video, with undergarments from Sheikh Hasina's house and be filmed doing that. Now, I take your point that in any big street protest, there are elements that resort to vandalism, hooliganism, that doesn't capture the entire protest. But why are Mujib-ur Rahman statues, the founding father of Bangladesh, being brought down? What does that tell us? What does that tell
tells
you?
us how much anger Hasina provoked. Basically, Mujib is bearing the sins of his daughter. Mujib's statue is bearing the sins of the daughter. Because we have to recognize that, you mentioned the fact that, there are human rights abuse but they've not only happened in the last 15 days when these 200 or 300 people have died. The disappearances in Bangladesh over the last 15 years are enormous. Bloggers have been killed. The Digital Security Act is far more nefarious in Bangladesh than in India. It's a copy of the Indian Act, and it is much worse than that. Corruption has been rampant. Nepotism has been rampant. The control over the party, the control over judiciary, the control over the military, the control over the administration has been significant. And people say that you're elected 5 times. No, Hasina was elected twice, in 1996 and then in 1990 and then in 2008. All the elections that followed, she was either elected more or less unopposed because the opposition boycotted it, or there was so much voter intimidation that within 2 hours in 2019, the opposition decided to boycott.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have to bear all this in mind to understand why people are so angry.
Let me bring in Sadanand on perhaps the most provocative thing that Salil has said so far, that these statues that are coming down of the founding father of Bangladesh, the country would not exist without him. India helped birth Bangladesh. This is the father basically carrying the cross, or the father's statue carrying the cross for the sins of the daughter. It points to the level or the depth of repression by Hasina, that when people like yourselves argue that she's still the best option, you're essentially making an anti-democracy argument.
So a couple of quick points. First, let me on one little factual thing. The bloggers were not killed by the Sheikh Hasina government. The bloggers were killed by machete-wielding Islamists. And if anything, you can fault the Sheikh Hasina government for not doing enough to protect them. But they weren't being killed by the government. That's number one, right? That's at least your talk.
I think Salil wants to interject. Salil,
one quick intervention, only to say that, yes, Sheikh Hasina's government did not kill them. B, did not protect them. And C, the government actually told the bloggers to shut up and not say things that are offensive.
Correct. And if anyone thinks that there's going to be more room for atheist bloggers in Bangladesh in 2024, then I have a bridge to sell them. So that's the sort of small factual point. The larger question really is that you have to separate two different things. I think the critique of Sheikh Hasina's illiberalism is a valid critique. It's one that I've made myself. Right, stuff like going after Mahfouzana, bogging him down in cases. I remember the photographer Shoaib Alam was like, because he was, giving an interview to Al Jazeera, and nobody condones any of that. And I think that's certainly something that where the anger was justified. But you have to be able to separate that from what is happening post Hasina. And what is happening post Hasina, there are basically two views. One is what I would call the rosy-eyed view, which is that, Jamaat never got too many seats and so on. And therefore, Bangladesh is going to sort of continue on this path of broadly secular economic development, and the minorities are going to be okay. The economy is going to do well. Foreign relations are going to be stable, but we won't have the excesses that we saw under Hasina. Now, if that happens, I'd be the happiest person. I think that would be a wonderful outcome for Bangladesh. It would be a wonderful outcome for India. It would be a wonderful outcome for the region. I'm a little bit more pessimistic. I think that the signs you're seeing, I think the extreme vandalism of all these monuments to do with Mujibur Rahman, they can't be wished away. They have enormous symbolic significance, because what is happening over here is it is a very clear attempt to erase and rewrite the history of that country, including its founding moment. They have burned down his house. What does that mean? That memorializes his life, that memorializes his assassination. That is gone. They have brought down not just that one statue that we just saw on screen, but they've also took a JCB to another monument. They have attacked the houses of many serving ministers in the government, but they have also gone after just regular Hindus. Now, where is any of this in line with the sort of idea we have of this post Hasina liberalism? All I'm saying is very clear that a post Hasina dispensation, in my mind, is more likely, is not likely to be more liberal, but its illiberalism will probably be tinged with religious fervor. Now, to the point about Jamaat, right? I think the problem with this discussion is that these things tend to get sort of bogged down into like minutiae about this party got which percent of vote. And the point is that Islamism is a set of ideas. Now, those ideas are to what extent should a radical form of religion or an extreme form of religion play a role in the public square? Now, it may be, at some point it may be championed mainly by Jamaat. At other point, it may be championed mainly by a group like Hifazat-e-Islam. And even Sheikh Hasina, as I point out in my column, has made compromises with these elements. The point from a sort of is to look at whether these elements in Bangladeshi society are going to be strengthened or weakened. My belief is they are going to be strengthened.
Okay. Salil, can we logically argue against the argument that Sadanand has just made, given what has unfolded in the last 24 hours? Now, you can hope that the last 24 hours will not be representative of what happens in the next few weeks and months. But what is the basis to hope that? What is the basis to hope that there is going to be a kind of new Bangladesh with a new kind of politics where, yes, if there was shrinking space for expression and civil rights under Hasina, what I'm hearing Sadanand say is that that space is going to reduce and shrink even further. And when you attack the statues, or when you vandalize, burn, bring down the statues of Mujibur Rahman, what you're effectively doing is questioning the tenets on which the country is founded. And for India in particular, it's a little bit like being the midwife who helped deliver a baby and have that baby turn against, the parent. That I might be mixing metaphors here, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, yes, the baby has turned against the parent. I mean, that's a very nice way of looking at it. So my question would be, what did the parent do to earn that hatred? I think it's worth examining that. And the other question is, why is it that even the midwife is hated so much? I think the mistake that a lot of people in India have made, including the analysts, is exactly falling for this kind of diet, that it's Hasina or bust kind of a thing, that, everything else is just terrible, and believing this idea that, this is a Chinese conspiracy or an American conspiracy or a Pakistani conspiracy, which completely, as Mahfouz Anam told you, denies Bangladeshi people their agency. People are being killed, yes, but, yes, there have been Hindu homes attacked or temples attacked. I'm not denying that even for a minute. So don't get me wrong. But out of the 200 to 300 people, I can bet that the vast majority who have been killed in the last 2 weeks are Muslims, right? And because Bangladesh is a Muslim majority country, it's like, when you talk about the number of people who died in the 71 war, vast majority of those who died were in that quote unquote genocide, because Bangladesh called it Gonohatta, were actually Muslim people who are Bangla nationalists. So it's Bangladeshi upon Bangladeshi violence. The criminal and the lumpen are going after those who are law-abiding or bystanders. That's the way to see it, rather than see it in this religious divide.
So let me ask you this. Do you see this as a moment of hope? Or do you see this as a military coup? Hang on, let me ask the question. Yeah. Do you see this as a coup, a military coup? Or do you see this as a people's revolution?
I do see it as a people's revolution, because the military has basically stood up by the side. The curfew was on. And when the curfew was on, you had the military basically putting its guns down and letting people go. So, I mean, in a subtle way, the military was signaling that we are on your side. And it was a people-led revolution. You didn't see a general coming with a gun and telling Hasina it's time to leave. That hasn't happened. I mean, whatever the conversation that took place between senior officers and, except for one junior officer and one retired commander, there was no public remark from people within the military saying one way or the other. And actually, Hasina had got its military organized such that she had her own loyalists in the senior position. So they were acceding to what people were. So it is definitely a people-led movement. It is a student-led movement, and the students' demands have been very just. The first thing they asked yesterday when I was listening to some of the student podcasts, one of them was basically saying that the president has to dissolve the parliament, which is the necessary, because the parliament itself was a sham. It was not a genuine elected parliament.
Okay, let me ask the same question to Sadanand. Sadanand, is this a people's revolution or a military coup?
Well, I mean, I think technically it's obviously a military coup, right? You have the army chief is in charge. He's calling the shots. The elected leader has fled the country. Now, I think that there's this is a very interesting slippery slope, and we should not romanticize uprisings simply because there may be students involved. And certainly there were students involved at various elements and at various times in this movement. The fact of the matter is that Sheikh Hasina, everyone agrees that the last election was flawed, but there was an election. The people in power right now have not been elected. So I hope that there's a very quick restoration of democracy. The second thing is that raises a question in any country, right? Because if you have you can have a situation where there is a, disgruntled minority, say, right? And let's just say that the 49% of a country supports one person and 51% supports another, and 49% has disgruntled elements, they lose an election. It's not very difficult to mobilize a few thousands of people and then take them to parliament, and then but the problem with that is that there lies a route to profound instability. So I don't think that in any situation, I don't think that these kinds of uprisings should automatically be legitimized. In any case, I think the most what is more pertinent over here in this particular case is what comes next. And my question comes down to, again, the question: what were the three main achievements that all reasonable people would agree upon in the last 15 years of Sheikh Hasina rule? Number one, Bangladesh going from being seen as an economic basket case to being seen something a little bit more akin to the Southeast Asian economies, particularly because they built this $47 billion garment industry. GDP growth averaged 6.5% for 10 years, which is quite impressive. Poverty rate is down to 5% as measured by the World Bank. And within 2 years, the UN says that it's going to graduate out of the group of least developed countries. It's a very significant achievement, right? If you look at the 57 countries of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, apart from the ones that happen to be blessed with oil and gas, there are very, very few that have managed any form of industrialization. I'm not saying that Bangladesh had suddenly become Denmark, but it was on a very good path economically. So number one is, will the post-Hasina dispensation be able to preserve and expand upon those gains? Number two, I think Sheikh Hasina had a foreign policy that was very practical. It was based on an understanding that India is the most important country in the region and that Bangladesh needed good ties with India. It needed to crack down on terrorist groups that were targeting India from Bangladeshi soil. She did an excellent, and it needed to have an ideology that was completely the opposite of Pakistan's when it came to India. Before Sheikh Hasina, Bangladesh's ideology or Bangladesh's approach to India was quite similar to Pakistan's in some ways, right? So that's the second part: a pragmatic foreign policy based on the country's development needs and based on a realization that good ties with India are central to development. And the third plank is an understanding that Bangladesh is a pluralistic nation and that it has various cultural strands that have come together. And being Muslim does not mean that you should be at war with your Hindu past. These are the three outstanding elements. Beyond that, I think a lot of the criticisms of Sheikh Hasina are completely valid. But on these three questions, I'd like to ask Salil, does he see room for optimism? Because on each of these three, I think the case for pessimism at this moment in time is stronger than the case for optimism.
So, Salil, go ahead. Economic progress, a kind of compact, a pluralistic compact with religious minorities, and a practical foreign policy, which certainly leaned in favor of India.
Yeah, so the first part is economics. And we have to look back at the fact that, the garment export industry in Bangladesh, there are two parts to it. One is, it goes back to 1978. Hasina did not create it. It was always there. And it took off because of the way the global garment trade functioned, particularly fast fashion. People wanted cheaper clothing, and Bangladesh had the competitive advantage, which is essentially cheap labor. And that's a very, very, very quicksilver thing, and people can move elsewhere. Bangladeshi manufacturers themselves are aware, and they are now investing in places like Mauritius and elsewhere, and investing in Africa and so on, because they know that there will be a time when it will be hard for them to sustain the industry there, which is fine. That's how globalization should work, and I'm not objecting to that. And yes, all the other indicators you talked about, social development, economic, I have written about that too. But probably where we might disagree a bit is that I've always felt that Bangladesh succeeds despite the government and not because of the government. Because a lot of the change that you see in Bangladesh is because of the hard work that the overseas Bangladesh worker does when he sends money that he earns.
So no credit to Hasina.
No, I'm not saying no credit, but some credit to it, perhaps. But we have
I think Sadanand has an interjection. Sadanand?
Yeah. No, you're muted.
Can we just focus this for a minute? On those three questions, the question is simple. Do you think the path ahead, 2024 onward, are you more optimistic or more pessimistic on each of those three? I have said very clearly that I think each of those three gains are endangered.
Yeah. So I get that. So on economics, I think I remain optimistic. I think it can remain the way it is. I don't see any reason to think it would be endangered. If it is endangered, it's because the garment industry moves elsewhere. It finds a cheaper location.
Instability is poison for business.
What is poison for business? The unrest. But Bangladesh is a hortal. I mean, Bangladesh is the capital of hortals in the world.
It's they lose about 70 to
80. No, they lose about 70 to 80 days a year of work because of strikes in any case, regardless of the government in power. So that's one thing. On foreign policy, I simply don't know, because I don't know who the next foreign minister is going to be and who. So that's something I would park for now. I would not really get into it. Whether it is good for India or not is not the concern for the Bangladeshi. Whoever is there should be good for Bangladesh. That
was my argument, that it was good for Bangladesh.
Yeah. Would it be? I don't know. I mean, because you don't know who the next foreign minister is. I don't know who the next foreign minister is. If Yunus is actually going to be in charge of Bangladesh in some form, he's going to be appointed probably as an advisor. I see that as a very good thing, because I think Muhammad Yunus is a good man whose heart is in the right place. He is now getting older, which is true. But if him and Kamal
he's 84 years old, Muhammad Yunus. But yes, the students have asked for him to be the caretaker, sort of advisor to the government and so on. But on the last point, which is perhaps one of the most critical points of what will happen to religious minorities.
So I see, no. So I see no. I mean, I take, it's a question of glass half full and half empty. Sadanand thinks it's going to be bad for them. I take hope from the images that we have seen.
I'm saying, what is the base? Well, so that's what I'm trying to understand. What's the basis for your glass half full view?
So I've been there often, right? I've written a book on Bangladesh, and I know the Sushil Somaj, as they call the civil society there. And I know that the spirit of 71, which was to a Bengali nationalist country, which is basically Bengali and Muslim. It's a great poem by the Bangladeshi American poet Tarfia Faizullah, where a Pakistani soldier is about to rape a Bangladeshi woman. And at that time, he yanks her by her hair. And this is also the poem, but it's a very poetic image. It's worth, and say, are you a Muslim or a Bengali? And she says, both. And he slaps her again. And I think that's something that the failure to and this is the point Mahfouz Anam has been repeatedly making, that this is exactly what India mistakes, and which is why India continues to see Bangladesh as Pakistan in the East. When it is something different, it is far more syncretic than Pakistan is.